Om Satyena Labhyastapasa Hyesa Atma Samya Gyanena Brahmacharena Nityam Antaha Sharirehi Jyotirmayo Hi Shubraha Yam Pashanti Yataiha Kshinadoshaha Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. The Atman, the indivisible self in all beings and all things, is realized by moderation, by knowledge, by austerity, and by veracity. All of these constantly cultivated. When mental impurities dissolve due to this practice, then the seer beholds it everywhere, existing in everything, even here in this very mind and body. Om, peace, peace, peace. May that reality protect us, may it sustain us, and may it illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world and with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. In this, the fourth class in a series of Qualification for Santana Dharma, which brooks the whole ability to glean from all of the world's religions the essential Dharma or path to righteousness that people can follow in this world, as we were just chanting, in this very life, in this very mind, in this very body. Those things, as tattvas, are very important to us as long as we're in the body. It's rather like Holy Mother saying that the mind is very important at this stage of the game. Why would she say that? Because when you transcend the mind, it's not so important anymore, because the mind is the hub, the matrix of all of this that you see, taste, touch, hear, and smell, and everything that you dream tonight, and everything that you visualize for the future, everything that you've experienced in the past, and everything in the present right now, with all of us together on this fourth class of that kind of teaching. So we have to remember that Adhikara Vichara is the subtitle of this class series, is about qualifying ourselves to know this indivisible self within us, which is beyond mind and body and transcendent of the senses and their objects. Just study your Patanjali Yoga and you'll find that to be the premise of the teaching, and in most Indian darshanas as well. So we always keep this higher mind in view. And it's like, if thine eye be single, you shall know the truth kind of teaching, which is a rather cryptical remark made by Jesus at a time of a fallen Judaism. And the same is true of this time of a fallen Hinduism and a fallen Christianity. This is called the Kali Yuga, kind of an age of darkness, particularly when you speak about it spiritually. But putting spirituality aside for now, what about just man unkind, as Vivekananda, I think, was the first one to coin that phrase back in the 1800s when he came amongst us, late 1800s, is that basically just Dharma could be defined as just be good, do good, as he said. That's kind of the premise of Buddhism too, is that you need to destroy papa, demerit that's accrued to your mind. It doesn't ever accrue to your soul, thankfully, because your soul's ever perfect, your Buddha nature in that case, and replace it with merit, punya. So that would be an obvious default zone, if you will, to qualify yourself for Atman, for knowing the Atman. And we've also said recently, and we were talking about it at satsang Saturday, just yesterday morning, when we all gathered there, that there is the realization of the Atman, then there's the qualifying yourself to realize the Atman. But even before those two steps, there's a preparation to qualify yourself to know the Atman. And we were talking about that in terms, if you remember, of mundane, human, conventional religion, which is a phrase that our founder, Lex Hickson, coined in this very life of ours. And he talked about that in terms of so many millions of people who are born in Christianity, born in Judaism, born in Hinduism, and so forth, even born Buddhist, and who are not practicing necessarily. They hold themselves as a member of that religion, and maybe do some rite or ritual around it, or attend some temple or church occasionally, and then just go on with their lives. And hopefully everything is punya, so good merit, good karma, because you're not creating any demerit, any what we would call negative karma as you go about your everyday life. You're not harming people, you're non-violent, you're truthful, you're not coveting the goods of others or other countries, as if you get my drift there. And therefore, you're keeping a kind of neutral station going on, and your mind can be peaceful and can even then reach toward equanimity of mind, which the yogis favor. So all of this, in contrast to the next step of qualifying yourself, if we look at it in this particular way I'm speaking of it, is to go on towards Dharma. That is, if you're born in religion, mundane religion, conventional religion, and you're just not feeling the depth of it, and you have a yearning, or you want to have intimate communion with divine reality, because you've maybe heard of the words nirvana or samadhi or satori in the Orient. And you think, what is that? And people are supposed to have attained it. Maybe by the hundreds and thousands, they've gotten free of this suffering that's plaguing the basic mass of humanity. And that bondage of ignorance and the suffering that comes from it is, you're able to transcend it if you put yourself into a position where you're qualifying yourself for a higher state of mind, a better perspective. And this isn't just the grass is greener on the other side of the fence kind of thing. Usually they use that expression in terms of what you can get out of life. But this is in terms of how you can get a spiritual life when maybe you don't have one yet. Maybe you do just have a mundane religious existence, and maybe you tried to graduate that and you got fortunate and got born with dharmic parents, as Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, or with yogic parents. Births like that are very difficult to come by in this world, quote unquote, according to Sri Krishna. So if you were one of those few in the 1,000, one in every 1,000, as he said, then you're beginning to qualify yourself for non-duality by courting the finer levels of dualism and qualified non-dualism, speaking philosophically, Dvaita and Vishishtadvaita, if you want to speak Sanskrit philosophically. And so that's going to require you to go beyond the morality and ethics teaching once you've learned them, and get into this Dharma, which they talk about, which became more popularized when the Zen Roshis and the Tibetan Buddhists and others began to come to our country, America, and to parts of Europe, and began to speak that word Dharma, and then gave us an idea that, oh, there is something beyond just moral and ethical teachings, stories and so forth that we're hearing of beings that transformed themselves from thieves into luminaries or something like that. What India calls its itihasa, or its symbolic scriptural history, historical in nature. But then there are these great scriptures that we studied that began to suggest to us that there were scriptures that were beyond the conventional run of things, like the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, and the Brahma Sutras, the Astaraka Samhita, the Avatutta Gita, the Adhyatma Ramayana, and I can go on exclaiming and extolling these beautiful scriptures. In that case, then, you have this, back to the subject of the day, you have this ability to, or this longing and leaning towards qualifying yourself in the Dharma. There's a teaching, Adharma, Dharma, Swadharma. It's a triputi in India, where a being would get rid of all these negative tendencies, adharmic tendencies, by use of the Dharma, get themselves in a righteous mode of life and mind, and then go on to their ultimate destiny, beyond Dharma to Swadharma. So these are all very well-known teachings in India that a person hears once they move towards Indian religion and philosophy, which many of us have done since the 1950s and 60s. And many more are beginning to get attracted to them because we have opened channels and accepted gurus, spiritual paths, and scriptures from other places than where we found them in America or in Europe, in libraries or in churches or in temples. In church and temple, vain thy search, Vivekananda was wont to say. Thine is the only hand that holds the rope that drags thee on. So he's trying to get you to understand that you've got a rope around your own neck and you're keeping yourself bound with it. And you're being pulled here and there and you don't know by who, God, devil, others, parents, ancestors, your own karma. Basically, it really comes down to that. It's your own hand that's holding that rope that's dragging you here and there. So he says in the end, let go thy hold. Come to know that you're the one that binds you and you're the one that will liberate yourself too. And the gurus are just there to point that out to you, and the paths are there to give you a roadmap of how to get home, back to the source. So all of that as a kind of preamble that I'm used to giving before I get our philosophical taste buds ready for the feast of Dharma and what we call in Vedanta Atmagyan. You might say morality and ethics, conventional religion, then Dharma, then Atmagyan, and then Brahmagyan. So Atmagyan begins to give you those very beautiful teachings like that you hear first, like that thou art, Tattvamasi, or Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahma, or Prajnanam Brahman, this self is Brahman. There's no difference between nature and spirit, God and mankind, creature and creator, in the essence, in the essential view. Those are all one thing. So that begins to inspire the seeker, the person who's the intrepid spiritual traveler, to go within and find out where the source of these great teachings of Atmagyan come from, or why the Dharma attracts them so much. And they get then inspired by hearing a few beautiful slokas or sutras that they hear an illumined soul say to them somewhere in the course of their life. We always used to sit with Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, peace and blessings be to him. And we were waiting for his opening talk, and he would always start out with something like, Om Brahmanandam Parama Sukadam Kevalam Gyanamurtim Dandvaititam Gagana Sadrasham Tattvama Shadi Laksham. I can still hear his voice ringing through the Vedanta Society Center, and trying to follow the Sanskrit, but then he would always readily give you the English translation. We salute the leader of our souls, whose grace our ignorance is dispelled, and right away you were taken. Whether you wanted to be or not, that's how inspiration comes to people. But with inspiration, it can wax and wane. After inspiration has to come aspiration. So that's really where I'm focusing us today, is that once you get inspired by hearing these things, which is called Shravana, then you have to be so allured by them and so committed to them that you're going to begin to go somewhere in silence and contemplate them. That's called manana. So you start with Shravana, you go to manana. We're trying to set up these SRV classes. This is the fourth one of this particular series, and there'll be a couple more, so that we're almost doing the Shravana Manana for you. And it's going to be up to you then to go do the Nidhi Jasana, which is realizing what you've just heard and making it a part of your everyday life. Satsankara. There's actually 4 steps to that particular practice. The 3 great proofs of truth, they call that sometimes. So if you're hearing these truths in no uncertain terms, as we have heard them from our Illumined teachers, and then in class we're pulling them apart for you for an hour, up to hour to 3 hours. In these classes we've been giving, we talk about them on the weekends in satsang and at our God blogs and Brahman Bites events that we've been putting on. So the whole week is filled with at least 3 or 4 or 5 of you opportunities for you to actually do the manana. Is engage your mind in it and keep it there. One of the beautiful things about satsang, that is getting together with a sangha around a person who's speaking satsanga, is that as long as your mind's there, it's focused, and you don't have to put forth any effort to do that. And unless you're still having the rise of the gunas, the dominance of the gunas are coming apart you. You were restless when you walked in, or you didn't get enough sleep last night and you're tired, various things like that. But most of the cases, when you move towards the atmosphere of Guru, Dharma, and Sangha, then you pretty much have set yourself up already. That's the preparation to hear the truth. And then that hearing the truth will prepare you to realize the truth. So I'm coming at you this way in from two or three different directions to continue to convince the flagging mind, the doubtful spirit, that is attracted but simply somehow can't pull itself into a one-pointed place for very long of a period at a time. I can focus my mind for just this long, then I've got to move out of it. That is the way of everyday life. I have to go to work, focus, I get tired, I come home, sleep, I go back the next day and do the same thing. But in spiritual life, that's not going to work for very long. You're going to have to learn how to focus all the time. You have to wake up from this ignorance because it's not real. And once you wake up, then you're going to have to practice or acquire the insomnia of yoga, as our founder Lexixon used to say. You have to remain ever awake. A man has come to me from a land that never sleeps. Now all my sleep and all my dreams have been transformed into radiant meditations. I learned this all-embracing mother way from a man who lives in a land where the mother wisdom never rises or sets. So mother's son of wisdom never rises or sets. It's a whole different level of consciousness you're talking about there when a person attains that kind of concentration. It's why concentration, the sixth limb of yoga, is headed for meditation, the seventh limb of yoga. And both of those together are going to posit you in samadhi, the eighth limb of yoga. And that's not all. When you find out that you have those three limbs mastered, they come back to you as samyama. And anywhere you put this focused mind reveals all its secrets to you. That is, it strips away the illusions of Maya and reveals Brahman. And that's called that samadhi at different levels. So all of this, again, to remind us that for the last 3 Sundays, and this 4th Sunday, we have been concentrating on these Indian darshanas, these paths to pure seeing, using this chart that I put together. After we had looked basically at this chart, the qualifications chart is rather, if you look at the number on the back, you can pretty much tell that it was created back early in my series of charts in the book, Footfalls of the Indian Rishis. So you can look that up. But basically, this is a new version of it, which is less just informational and more point-by-point dynamics of what is here on this chart. So maybe since our time is limited to an hour on these Sunday sessions, we should plunge back into this chart. Yes, I'm sorry, in this hour and a half class we have today. And we mentioned already that the background is these Divine Mother's arms. She's famous for having so many arms. Durga with 10, Amaji with 8 and 6, and Kali with 4, and so forth. So each of these arms is holding this flame, and each of these flames represent one of these great darshanas of India. I'd like to reference quickly the Advaita one sometime today, which is not really a darshan anymore. It's the underlying foundation of all of them. That's in the lower left-hand arm, her right-hand hand. So we might go to that in a minute, but we need to remind ourselves that we looked at Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta on this chart in all its bullet points. You can look back on that. You can even write me questions on certain points of it. If you're still good at email, and if you find a way to communicate through SRV, we're ready and waiting to answer any questions that come up around the ingestion of these beautiful paths of clear seeing called darshanas. Now, what we want to do now that we have taken 3 of the 6 or 7 that are posted here on this chart very deeply, that is, we've looked at Samkhya, we've looked at Yoga, and we've looked at Vedanta. I wanted to show you the founders of them and how they contribute to it. And this is going to be rather a quick trip. This is actually the background to this is the cover of my new book on yoga. It's called Atmic Testimony on Yoga, because Atman is, you think of that word, you think Vedanta. So how does Vedanta look on Patanjali's system of the 8-limbed yoga? These are 2 great systems in India. So it becomes an occasion of marvel and amazement for seers or even philosophers who are deeply into these systems to see how one system contrasts the other, how it matches the other, and what one founder said about the other system. And philosophically speaking, that is blissful to the person who is deep into these paths of truth. And so, therefore, why I put together these 3 that we've just discussed over the last 3 Sundays, Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta. And now I want to show you their contributions side by side. So first of all, you see Lord Kapila, a likeness of him in the upper left-hand side of the chart. And as we know, because of what we studied, this will be both a review and a way of telling us how these great beings fathomed the depths of consciousness and came up with these jewels. And I'd say came up with a whole treasure chest called Samkhya and opened it up and showed the jewels in it. It would be much like the chart that we sometimes look at with the sunken treasure chest and all of the various diamonds in it and jewels when we teach about the sadhana chatushtaya, the 4 great contributions of Vedanta. We'll probably get to that here. But back to Samkhya, Lord Kapila has presented us the homework of 24 cosmic principles. Remember, those are insentient principles, all the way to mind and intellect and great mind. They're not the Atman. So this is how we are qualifying ourselves to know that the Atman is beyond mind and intellect. People have gotten caught in mind and intellect. There's plenty of proof of that, particularly in our materialistic times and in Western civilization. So that should be a warning sign to us that you can get caught in these higher tattvas. And basically, maybe what you want to do is keep in mind that you can use them, as Holy Mother said, keep this mind in good shape because it's going to take you to Brahman. Did I finish that quote a few minutes ago that I brought up? Keep this mind in fine shape because it's the vehicle by which you get to Brahman. We were talking yesterday about Swami Vivekananda saying, we want to transcend Quran, Bible and Gita to get to this higher state of understanding. But we don't do those by casting them out. We do them by studying them and knowing them each. That's what you might want to say about Lord Kapil's turn towards putting together earth, air, fire, water, ether, hearing, tasting, touching, hearing, and smelling, the 5 tanmatras, the fourfold mind, and the great Mahat, all under the provision of Purusha and Prakriti. So you've got this wonderful system of tattvas. You just have to remember that those are stepping stones to get across the river to the ocean. And in other words, consciousness mans them, and it mans them all the way down to earth. That's why I just chanted this Atman. When mental impurities dissolve, the seer sees this Atman everywhere in everything. He's not saying he sees it everywhere, just in the gods, or sees it just in the humans. He sees it everywhere. It's the foundation of objects too. So this is all seeing in the widest way of describing it. So there's how a great soul would see Brahman at the background of everything. Like Sri Ramakrishna walking into a wax museum, you see, and then he went into samadhi and they asked him why. He says, well, I see these wax figurines and I see this light behind them that's illuminating them. And that's what my samadhi is, just like that. It's a very good analogy, how I see the light in everything in the wax figures that are people, plants, animals, and so forth. That they're just made of matter and animated by prana. So these are some of the tattvas that you have to know about them if you want to explain to your child, to your brother, to your parents if they haven't got the Dharma yet, like what's happened to some of us. If you want to explain the dynamics of consciousness, how it so-called moves through the tattvas, then you'll have to know the tattvas. If you're just thinking of it as a world or as a fireplace or as a rain shower, which we just had here a few minutes ago, then you're not specifying that this is a tattva which consciousness occupies, you see. It takes it on and sloughs it off, just like you do with your body. The body's also one of those tattvas, made of 5 elements. So presented the 24 tattvas, then he brought forth to us this great teaching that was older than him, I'm sure, about the 3 gunas. Why am I balanced today? Yesterday I was restless. The day before that I was depressed and tired. The 3 gunas are constantly cycling through people. So it's one of the best teachings pertinent to this 3 system. You see, Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta that we've studied over the last 3 systems. It's particular to that great Sad Darshana, this triple Darshana. And so the gunas, when you bring those out of hiding, then you know where to put the fault and blame for everything that you thought was your fault. Your only fault was to let them overpower you. If you master them, like Triguna Titananda did, is the name of one of Sri Ramakrishna's direct disciples. I said, I've mastered those now. I'm now Triguna Tita. I'm past, I'm transcended of the 3 gunas. They don't affect me anymore. They're just some of the tattvas that are constantly changing. Kapila also traced the path of involution. Otherwise, we'd be left in the lurch, as most of us still are here in the West, thinking that we're born from who knows where by the combination of the sperm and the ovum because of the sexual act of procreation of the parents. And we trace it back to physical causes only. But the teachings are telling us we're unborn. So if we have to know that the body is what's getting born, but the soul isn't, then we're going to have to know that there's a path back to the source, not just an evolution, but an involution. Huge, isn't it? I mean, this is one of the most important of all ancient contributions to our dilemmas today, is to know that there's a path inward. People are going around glibly talking about it. I'm going inside. I live inside and this and that. But they don't know actually how they came outside and what processes they used. And they don't meditate on them out here so they can use them to get back into what's called a conscious death. They just throw them out when death approaches or disease. They just throw them out the door like, those aren't helpful to me anymore. You're supposed to meditate on them, said the father of yoga after he came up with them, so that you put them into your memory again. This is how you got here. You didn't get here through luck or through, some sort of happenstance, coincidence, or it just happened, man. This is actually how you as a consciousness determined that you would take on a body and how you can give it up. So I think one of the most important contributions of Sankhya that I found in its ancient scriptures, what's left of them, is that there is a path of involution. And I saw that, well, why haven't they been bringing that out all this time? You don't even hear it talked about much in yoga and Vedanta. It's just like, oh, we already learned that from Samkhya. We just take it for granted. But when you get to a Kali Yuga, no, we've forgotten all that. You've forgotten most of that wisdom. So you're saying, I'm stuck out here in nature. I die. I matter. I suffer. These are your mantras. These are your great conclusions, you see. It's not working for most of us. Those of us who found the great ideal of Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna and who found the eternal path of Vedanta in this lifetime, that doesn't work for us. And we searched for those greatnesses, those mahat. And we found them in ourselves. Obviously, they're in ourselves because we found them. We wouldn't have found them if they weren't inside of ourselves. So, sancharaha, prati, sancharaha. There's a movement out of everything from non-dual reality down to the veriest worm, to quote Vivekananda. And there's a reverse involution after everything's evolved out back to the source. It's a law in Samkhya. It's one of the 10 laws of Samkhya. So we can look at those in another chart, which I put out. These are like the 10 commandments of India. If you want to make a nice comparison, look for it in the footfalls. You'll see it under those teachings of Samkhya Yoga and the teachings on Maya and in Tantra. I mean, who was there that didn't borrow from Kapila, including the Tantrasists? He also traced the path, we said that. He also revealed 5 kinds of ignorance to us. And then he unveiled accomplishments and complacencies. What are the things we want? There are 8 of them. What are the things we want to be careful of? There are 9 of them. See? So this is also a teaching in the Samkhya tradition. Like the accomplishments would be such like, the first 3 would be transcend suffering. Transcend 3 levels of suffering. Sounds like Lord Buddha, doesn't it? No, Buddha was born a few thousand years after him in the town Kapila was born in. So the 2 might as well have been the same soul coming back at different times to reintroduce these teachings about suffering which is the first noble truth in today's Buddhism. Whatever the case may be, you've got this 3 kinds of suffering, you accomplish transcendence of that, like with the 3 gunas. After that, you study a path, a single path, until you find the destination of it. After that, you have to, of course, take a guru for that. And you have to find compatriots and friends on the path, Sangha, for that. And so these are things like the accomplishments. And then there are things you watch out for very carefully. We see these begin to show up in Patanjali's way of speaking too. All right, beautiful quotes by Vivekananda you can look at later because I'm moving through this chart to cement together or tie together everything we've just studied in the past 3 weeks about Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta. What about yoga in the middle there? Patanjali placed yogas into 8 limbs. Before that, well, there were 18 chapters on yoga in the Gita. There were different yogas being taught all over India all the time. Yoga is a common word, a common word with high quality to it. So Patanjali came along and did us the great favor. Let's put this into a practice that's very congenial and cogent. A tree you can climb, limb by limb. And so that's what we started to do. And who came along to comment on that? Vedavyas did, to comment on the yoga system. So each one of these systems, Patanjali looked at Samkhya, borrowed some of that. Vedavyas looked at yoga, borrowed some of that. Today we have Vedanta pretty much consisting of these, with a good cross-section of Tantra thrown in, and also a foundation of non-duality that was there all the time. And don't forget the hand that wields it all, the Divine Mother, who Patanjali mentioned in the very last sutra of his Yoga Sutras. He brought out the Chit Shakti twice in the last few sutras of the fourth pada. Very beautiful. So these beings were all aware of the secret of Divine Mother Shakti behind everything. He accented looking at the vrittis of your mind. He was the one that brought that out. Said, mind vibrates, everything comes. When it stops vibrating, everything goes away. See, who can deny that? If they did deny it, you'd ask them, well, then who were you and where were you last night in deep sleep? And where do you come from? I come from vibrating mind. What I think I am comes from vibrating mind. My ego, my mind, my intellect, my body, my senses. What did I just say? 5 or 10 of the tattvas. That's what I just said. So I think I come from the tattvas all this time. I think I'm a body. I think I'm a brain. I think I'm energy, prana. I think all these things, which I'm really, is not my essence. So I have to go back to Lord Kapila for him to be very clear with me about saying, those are not your essence. Your Purusha is your essence. So this is what we mean by Patanjali coming along and saying, look at your mind's vibrations and yoga chitti vritti nirodha them. Let's go nirodha them. Let's put them to sleep. Let's destroy them. Let's dissolve them. Let's annihilate them. Let's attenuate them. Let's do away with them in meditation, because you're doing that every night in deep sleep. And that's where you're most blissful, in deep sleep. The least amount of weights hanging on you in deep sleep. The karmas are in abeyance in deep sleep. Your ego's not bothering you in deep sleep. The worlds don't exist in deep sleep. Unfortunately, neither does Brahman exist in deep sleep. So you're going to have to go beyond deep sleep. But this is one of the important facets of yoga, which you never hear, because people are into physical yoga only. But the real teachings are right here from Patanjali. These are what he wanted us to know. He said basically 1 or 2 things about asana, and he said basically 3 or 4 things about prana, but he said a lot about these 8 things that I've listed here, 8 or 9. What's another one? He classified the samadhis at a time when probably the last time they had seen samadhi was in Lord Buddha, some 700 years before him. So there's these great souls come back like Ramakrishna did in this age and say, well, guess what? Don't forget samadhi. What's that? Oh, it's what you see me in right now. Now I'm here, now I'm gone. See, here today, gone to Maui, as we say in Hawaii. See, we're going to take our minds and put them in some other fine, formless paradise that we have the ability to go to. So he classified these different high levels of mind because the vrittis, when they were quelled or attenuated, left the mind open to these deeper moods that you couldn't see when the mind was vibrating. When the mind stops vibrating, all these objects that it vibrates around disappear. Oh, there's something behind that. I hear something, like Sri Ramakrishna used to say. But what happens when a man hears the word Om? He goes, oh, what is that? What is that? Does that sound like an ordinary experience? So this is how the vrittis get out of the way and you hear a sound of Om, or you see the light, Jyoti, of Brahman, and you're stunned. They call that Jada Samadhi. You go into a stunned state. We saw Christ in that state under a tree. We saw Buddha in that state under a tree. And how many other beings? Muhammad in the wilderness in that state, probably under a little scraggly tree trying to get some shade. So basically, here you have these teachings that are common throughout the ages, and these great beings who are completely enamored of them, and who will come to earth and take on a body, use these tattvas to come into the body and transmit these teachings to us in even an age such as this. Then Patanjali said, take these tattvas and use them as meditations. Not just, earth, air. I know the story. I know the rap. I know the tale. Basically, you have to meditate upon them deeply to eke out their essence, Swarupa in everything, that Atman is hiding, or divine mother power, Shakti, that's hiding in them. Then he condensed the obstacles and distractions to yoga, just very much like Kapila did with these accomplishments and complacencies. He followed Kapila's lead. And though the age was 1,000 or 2,000 years later, most likely in Patanjali's time, nevertheless, he said, these complacencies, these accomplishments have changed over these few thousand years. I'm going to have to bring them current in today's time so people can understand them better. Each avatar and each head of a philosophy, a great darshana, is doing that every 500 to several thousand years, so that these teachings can remain current and fresh in the minds of human beings, so they can get free using them. He refined the dynamics of perception. He cited types of minds and methods for mastery, 5 types of mind, 7 methods of mastery, if you look at the Yoga Sutras. And he composed the definitive Kriya Yoga, the one that we're still, serious students are still using today to get free. Vedavyas, there's a lot you could say about him. Basically, it's this great soul came in this age to save the Upanishads and to recreate, recompose new scriptures for the time, or to compile them so that we'll remember them. There you see it, composed the Mahabharata, inside of which the Gita was found. He composed the Brahma Sutras, saved many Upanishads from extinction, classified the Upanishads into 4 Vedas for us. But that would have certainly been lost in time, including all the families that composed those Vedas. So we would have forgotten about beings like Svetasvataropanisad or others. He passed a lot of this wisdom on to his son, Sukha Dev, and we'll be studying some of that in Portland in this coming visit to the ashram in Oregon, when we look at the Rudra Upanishad and how Lord Brahma is transferring these teachings to his son. He formulated the 18 Puranas for people of more average comprehension. Brahma Sutras are beyond me. The Upanishads are a lot to take in. The Puranas, I like those, you see, because these are understandable. They take these abstruse truths and they put them down into life. I can understand them and practice them. He also composed the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he did commentary on this great man's system that was hundreds of years earlier than him. That's Patanjali's yoga. So there is basically Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta in terms of the darshanams themselves, how they came through time, the various qualifications that they give us in order to understand them, and the great founders that composed each one of them. Tempting to say with the Advaita that probably it might have just been the same great soul just coming again and again. That's the way they look at it, because non-duality is known to Indian philosophy. It's not known to any other religion or philosophy in this world. It's only known to India, not Indian Advaita, surely, Tish used to say. Oh, the scientists are saying that that there's a big connection between science and Advaita. Not Hindu, not Indian Advaita, there isn't. So India understood non-duality only, no one else. And we're finding that out more and more. In fact, there are even souls coming back with a great understanding of Advaita who are able to communicate it to us. That's what we want to look at here when we take a look at this hand with its great flame called Advaita. Again, I'm saying it's not really necessarily a darshana. I wouldn't have any problem looking at it or defining it as one, but it's really the underlying ground of all of these other systems. And all these great souls whom I've just showed to you were no doubt Advaitas. This is where you can be a Vedantist, you can be a yogi, you can be a Buddhist, and you can be a Samkhyaist, and you can be a Tantricist, and still be an Advaitin. People used to ask Holy Mother about that after Sri Ramakrishna had left the body. What was he? He was such a great soul. He taught us so much. He realized the essence of all religions and so forth and so on. So what do we call ourselves as his followers? And she told him, since he was an Advaitist, you too are an Advaitist. So this is the one great run of thought that reached the highest pinnacle and dropped all the other stages of the rocket after it arrived. And when you get to non-duality, that is yourself. That you're seeing, experiencing, and living in, like we saw our teacher Swami Sheshananda doing that. You just take in the Advaita and you just live in that. And non-duality becomes the proving ground of every other system. It's like that one, you struggle for a word, let's call it a great philosophy now. It's like the one philosophy that makes all the other philosophies not only work in their own arenas, but connect the way Sri Ramakrishna did. And that's what we should go to here to make headway in this, because next week we'll start looking at Tantra and we'll start looking at some of these others on here. The Kundalini system is a fantastic system to study, to qualify yourself. But to speak of Lord Vashishta's yoga, because he was probably practically as old as Lord Kapila this time. So we go back to Lord Vashishta, we also look way back in time before Krishna and at the time of the early avatar, the early human avatar, Ramchandra. So if we look here quickly at this great saying in the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti, then we see how Sri Ramakrishna came along and looking into the most ancient teachings of the Vedas, back there to the time of Lord Kapila and before, and Lord Vashishta heard that one phrase that really epitomized his level of realization, that there is one truth in this world, and in all worlds really, but there are different ways to approach it, different paths to approach it. So we've heard that early on too, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. And it comes out of the Rig Veda. I looked up the sloka for it, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti Agnir, and it goes on for several lines. And Indram, Mitram, Varunam, Agnihi, Varunagnihi, Mitram, Indram, Mitram, Varunam, Agni, Matarato Divyaha, Saparna Gorutman, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti Agnim, Yaman Matarishvanamahu. It's a beautiful sloka out of the Rig Veda, which is talking about God as being the friend, the eternal companion to all beings. God is the devourer of death. God is the winged carrier of consciousness, Varuna, and he's Varuna, the waters of life. He's the fire of yoga. He's Vishnu's mount, Garuda. He's the eternal friend of the gods, of all the gods, and he's the one that shines forth the light. These are all English equivalents to the Sanskrit. I just was able to recall from my memory. But basically, that one line is found in that sloka, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanti Agnim Yaman Matarish Vanamahu. Vanamahu. Mahu would be, of course, the great mind. So it translates nicely into truth is one. Saints, seers, and sages call it by different names. On the other side, it's been put in different ways of expressing, like in the Mundaka Upanishad, that same great sloka is translated. There are many mighty rivers flowing into the sea, which when they reach their destination lose all sense of name, form, and identity, and merge themselves into the boundless ocean of absolute reality, or non-dual reality. So this is at the heart, this is the Advaita, or the non-duality, at the heart of all these systems, three of which we've been looking at closely over the last 3 weeks to help qualify ourselves to understand ultimately this very principle, this very axiom, this highest of truths, this transcendental reality, which tells us about our consciousness with a capital C as compared to the consciousness of the mind and the senses and so forth, and animals and plants, or this pure conscious awareness that is the nature of the Atman. It's the very nature of it. It's not like ornaments put on a tree. It's like the green of the tree. It's the very nature of the thing itself. So those two quotes out of the Vedas and a later Upanishad have been there to explain to us the beauty of this non-duality that is at the foundation of all this. Here's a few quotes in that regard from Sri Ramakrishna. The message of the Gita is what you get when you say Gita many times in a row. It turns into Tyagi, which means renunciation. So he's talking about how these scriptures all are speaking about this renunciation of all these insentient principles that now we should know about because they've been taught to us by great souls. And then we're qualifying ourselves to know the one sentient principle in all by renouncing these insentient principles. I think that was really the highest meaning to get thee behind me, what Jesus said. He wasn't necessarily talking about an incarnate devil because he didn't believe in that. He believed in Almighty Father, and he wanted people to realize it. I and my Father are one. And he wanted you to realize it through knowing that birds have nests, foxes have holes, but you don't have any place to lay your head here. You're not the tattvas, you're not matter, you're spirit. And that's why he got stunned looking at that very spirit in the wilderness that time. And he came out of the wilderness and said, I'm the light of the world. So I mean, all of that leans more toward the real message of Jesus that he wanted you to know about. A lot of the other was added in later by church fathers for various reasons and so forth. But even the idea of origins was added in, I think, because India always knew that non-origination was the truth of everything, that nothing's ever born, it never dies. It just is, and it appears and disappears off of the breast of the ocean of consciousness. An ocean is one of the best things to meditate on as an alambana, isn't it? Because it's a boundless, vast body of water You can't even see the end of it on all four sides when you're out in it. And so underneath is all homogeneous depths. If it's only on the surface that it starts to sport waves. So just looking at that, it's like God's gift to any sensitive soul to say, if I meditated on the ocean, water, that is, one of the five elements, as an alambana, as the father of yoga told me to do after acquainting me with Kapula's system about water being one of the 24 cosmic principles, if I'm following that tradition and I meditate on the ocean, either on the shore or out in a boat or whatever, from a mountaintop, then it's telling me this precious truth that consciousness is one, indivisible, and homogeneous at its depths, but there is a sporting, there is a play that comes off of it, a foam that comes off of it, a sea breeze that comes off of it, foam, waves. Ramakrishna used to say, sport on the breast of that, on the blissful breast of that ocean of indivisible consciousness. So, of course, you could wax eloquent about that, and the Upanishads and the Rishis of India did, using that as one of the great alambanas. The other great alambana is fire with the sun. So ocean and sun capture the prize in a way as the highest thing to meditate on, other than your own soul. Once you find it, are these great elements of water, fire and water, that manifest themselves. Because most people aren't looking around saying, oh, look at the ether, you see, or look at air. You feel the breeze, and then you start to think about it. So these things don't suggest themselves very often to you. Fire and water do. So meditating on the verdant earth would be probably a second runner-up for that kind of realization amongst a lambanic meditation that yoga wants you to do. So Sri Ramakrishna took that very ability of combining together in samyama style in yoga, the ability to see Brahman in everything, and he put that samyama style on the religions of the world. And he did that, we have to add in, because he loved God, and he wanted to see God manifest through all these different human systems, because the humans also get close to God, closer than any other of the denizens of the earth, probably closer to them, can get closer to them than the asuras and the gods can get, because the human beings have that Atman more pronounced in them. That is, they can realize the Atman in one lifetime if they wanted to, but the gods, the asuras, and the ancestors most likely cannot do that. They're going to have to come back to earth, to do that. So the humans have that distinction of being divine. This is why, we draw back and kind of shrink back when we hear human being called sinners or something. We should call them divine, and they've fallen under, some problem of sin and karma, but their essence is divine, and that can be brought out right away. Some of these scriptures we just talked about that Vedavyas composed are very good at explaining that to us. These souls that tore off the mantle of darkness and came out shining in the light, like Christ came out of the wilderness. So in this way, then, we take two quotes by Sri Ramakrishna that point us in that direction. He says, for instance, everyone thinks that their watch keeps the right time, but they should check their watch with the sundial. So that sundial, of course, would be God, or maybe you could say the Mahat, or Ishvara, shining its light upon all these worlds. In the West, for so long, we've been under the narrow, problematic view that there's one world and one body. But really, the truth of it is that there are 7 worlds and 3 bodies, at least. So that's teaching that India has been freed by since the time of Lord Kapila, that you have 3 bodies, a physical, a mental, and a causal, you might say, an absolute body. And they each are provided, they're each endowed with senses. There's a subtle senses in your mind and so forth. The third eye in your third body comes, that's a sense, in a sense. And then there's these multitude of worlds. If you want to subdivide them, there's 7 chakras or lotuses. But each one of those lotuses is said to contain billions of worlds, just like this physical world that we're on contains billions of worlds, right? Up there somewhere. So that in that way, there are billions and billions of places where divine can manifest itself and express its light. But all hunkered down to, oh no, there's only one world, this physical world, and we only have one body and only one lifetime in which to express that unlimited light. That's untenable and unacceptable. So India has always been freed thinking in terms of this vastness of expression. And that's what non-duality is best utilized for once you qualify yourself for it. Using what? Yeah. Conventional religion and mind and brain and all of that, the lower wisdom like science and so forth, to get beyond into the Dharma, which is the teachings of spirituality about these very same things that we've built narrow constructs around and can't get to them anymore. And then using that Dharma then to get to the higher knowledge of the self and its relationship with the Absolute, all the way to absolute immersion in that great self. What Lord Buddha talked about is the small self merging into the great self. And of course, the Upanishads speak about that too. Touch nayora vrinnimehe gatum yagyaya gatum yena pataye. You want to make the sacrifice, yagya, of everything that you find out here that's consisting of the tattvas that you've done meditation on with the lambanas needs to be offered back to the great self continually, all the time. You can't stop making this offering, or else you'll end up satisfied somehow with physical things. Back to what I was saying, there's one world and there's one body and one lifetime. And if that's very, very narrow, stunted thinking. So West has been laboring under that since before Jesus came. But India has been liberated since well before Jesus came by these thoughts of Vedanta, which we're calling Vedanta nowadays. So this is what Sri Ramakrishna says. Check your watch with the sundial. And find where the true light is coming from and what time it really is in the series of your lifetimes. Each one is a second, in a minute, in an hour, in a week, in a month, in a year, in a century, in a millennia, in a yuga, in a mahayuga, and beyond. Find out the source of time. That's what Shiva will help you do, for instance. Now, these are all whetters of appetites, for us to approach gingerly this idea of non-duality, which we want to look at after, and we're doing it to try and put an exclamation point on the beautiful study of 4 weeks that we all have done on Samkhya, Yoga, and Vedanta. 3 of these great darshanas, the most pronounced of all of them, because you're not finding a lot of knowledge of Vishishta anymore. You're not finding Tantra very much, except woven in to the warp and woof of Indian cosmology and philosophy and worship. And probably Kundalini is rather a mystical system that not a lot of people, other than those who are attracted to mysticism, are drawn to. But these 3 are the real mainstays of Indian philosophy today. And make sure and be very careful that when you say yoga, you mean Patanjala or 8-limbed yoga, and don't reduce it to just some body postures and some breathing exercises. That's doing it an injustice. So that, if we study it, graduates us qualifies us to understand something that's beyond understanding, if you want to put it that way. And that's this non-duality that these slokas I've just read and these stings by Sri Ramakrishna that I've just quoted prepare us for. So there you can see, as it were, the way he did it with different thinking minds of the world. You can see in this forest down here, all of it at the base of this great mountain, what to speak of what's at the peak and the way up, you can see these different religions of the world. There's Islam, one of those paths down there, Christianity, another. Zoroastrianism, I met a Zoroastrian priest some years ago, and he said his religion is really disappearing a lot. He was telling me on the plane, we were up there at 30,000 feet talking about world philosophy with him. It's beautiful. So Zoroastrianism is still there. You see Judaism as a very pretty ancient path there at the foundation. Over on the far side, Shintoism of Japan. Jainism, one of the ancient pre-Buddhistic paths of nonviolence in India. The Jains, they're still there and still teaching and have their own scripture and their own teachings. They're very, very nonviolent, vegetarian, things like that. There's Hinduism, kind of a representative of an umbrella of all these things we've been looking at. Although we kind of look askance a little bit at that title, which is Indus River. So let's call them Hindus. It's kind of the go-to move with that. So it was by the English who came up with that name, but it has stuck as an expression for a world religion, at least. So if we take that in the spirit that it wasn't intended, but let's take it in the right spirit, then you'll find out that it can act as a coverall for all of these darshanas listed on this chart. We'd rather put Vedanta up there nowadays, or Neo-Vedanta, because Vivekananda has come and given that all a whole new perspective and a whole new life of the spirit. Also, there is Buddhism, one of the young kids on the block, as far as India is concerned. That's the youngest. And so just like Islam is the youngest religion of the Middle East on the block. So those two, that's why you hear so much about them and not so much about Vedanta and others, is because those are moving in streams, in vibrational streams amongst the people, Buddhism and Islam as religions. But without getting into comparisons or any other thing, what we're doing to bring this all together is to express how Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedantayagnim, that is this great oneness or not two-ness, is what Sri Ramakrishna was able to bring together and express through his own spiritual experience. So he got into each one of these paths. So you could see him down there. We could have put a little cartoon figure. It could be a game for the children, So let's take a Ramakrishna figure and walk him along Judaism. Oh, okay, got that. Let's walk him along Christianity. Had a vision of Jesus. Let's go over here and just make a kid's game out of it to show how this great soul, finally, someone has come along to walk all these paths and find the essence at the end to be the same. The religions, no, not the same. The essence that they lead to and are directed towards and what they come from, yes, that's identical. And that's what Advaita would express to you in one of its great facets, which I would call universality. Sri Ramakrishna brought us back universality in a well-defined way that's all-inclusive. So we have a new definition for universalism or universality that we got out of 4 dictionaries. It's beautiful with each one of the dictionaries, even though they're composed in Europe and America, what they say about universality. It's like right to the point, only stripped of all religion, which isn't always a bad thing for people, for intellectuals. But basically, it's a very beautiful description. Maybe I can bring it next week and show it to you. But this is this great forest of the world. You might say, if you're not on a path, you're in the forest of the world, wandering. I think probably every one of these religions has a way of saying that to you. You're lost. You're a lost soul, or you haven't found what you're seeking for. You're still attached to nature. You haven't satisfied your desires for objects, and you're attracted by and hypnotized by movements in Prakriti and nature, and you're attached to objects. You're willing to go to war to get these for yourself and take them to yourself. So it's all this name, fame, and game. As Ramakrishna said, that you want a name for yourself and you want it to be famous, and you get all of that through gaining wealth. Then you've reached the apex of everything, like kings and emperors and Caesars, and granted to Caesar what is Caesar's kind of teaching. So with that as an explanation of this whole forest with trails running through it, then you could have put easily, I could have put here just the forest of Maya, if you want to have this one word in which the Indian seers came up with, or another one favored more by the Buddhists, samsara. So India's teaching really is all about nirvana and samsara. It's not about heaven and hell, because heaven and hell are both inside of this great, grander concept of, because if you say nirvana, you're saying, non-duality. And if you say samsara, you're saying a trap you've fallen into that you need to extract yourself from. You need to extricate yourself from that. Get off the wheel of samsara. It's been very well taught about, so that nirvana reveals itself to you, and you realize even what's beyond nirvana in terms of the great non-dual teachings. So that's the backdrop upon which all of these are moving. From the Dhammapada, Buddha says, as the highest inward altitude of spiritual experience, the Arhat beholds the Paragatam, the supreme goal, as well as all of the many pathways below leading up to the mountaintop. So the Arhat in that day was your seer of India. Then Buddhism became a religion, an ism. And the Arhats, some 500 of them all got together not long after the Buddha had reached nirvana, Mahanirvana, and put together everything they remember hearing him saying from their teachers and from the teachers' teachers over those several centuries. And that turned into this beautiful scripture called the Dhammapada. A lot of that is very much like parables. Why are they teaching parables? Pretty easy to understand that most people can't understand this Dharma that we've been talking about for 3 weeks yet. They don't have the time to put their minds on it, and maybe they're already beyond it. Maybe they haven't reached it yet. Whatever the case may be, there's, as Svetasvataropanisad says, there's these Puranas that I've given you. These will save you. Purana means that which will save. So basically, I'll give you these so you can save yourself in this forest of Maya. And if you'll find yourself out of the forest of Maya by getting on one of these tracks, and then you too can say, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedantya. You can say that I found out that these paths led me to the base of the mountain. And then there was basically, as I've put it here, one path that led you up the mountain, one well-trodden path that every great soul of every religion found out that wanted to reach the non-dual peak. Now, if they didn't want to reach the non-dual peak, allowance has to be made for those who are following the path of devotion to a form. A form would be Jesus in Christianity would be the Lord Buddha himself. Shakyamuni in Buddhism would be Krishna or Ram in Hinduism, and and so forth. Moses in Judaism. You have your Ishtam in that particular religion. You might say he's waiting for you at the apex of, at the end of each of these paths, and then showing you the mountain of the Almighty Father, of Yahweh, of Brahman, of Pragyaparam, Buddha called it. And so you get to the Father through the Son. That's a great teaching in Christianity. So you get to the Son first, and then he points you to the Father. And those souls, some of them say, I think I'll just stay at your feet, Lord. And others say, how do I get to the top of the mountain? And these great souls point the way. And they ask, well, shouldn't I stay here with you? You can. What did you do when you reached here? I went to the top. Then I came back. See, it's a very simple way in which I can explain the difference between basically Brahmagyan and Parabhakti, Prema Bhakti. See, extreme love for the form of God, or extreme love for the ocean of formlessness, what it would feel to dive into that and merge with it. Each one of these is an ultimate and consummate way of reaching enlightenment. And so we don't want to compare apples and oranges here in that way, but it's worthy of mention in this chart particularly, is that Advaita starts here, you see. You've reached the base of the mountain. What are you going to need to get on the Advaitic path? Basically, if you want to strip it of not only religion, but philosophical precepts that you learned and qualified yourself with the Dharma, then you're going to need this razor-sharp discrimination of how to climb this mountain of ultimate oneness, how to reach the peak, what Buddha called here the Paragatam, the supreme goal. Many of these souls consider that to be the highest and supreme goal. It's their followers sometimes that don't, because they have such devotion to the Ishtam, or the ideal of that path, that that's enough for them. Sri Ramakrishna, very unique way of giving ground and giving credence to both of those. Once he was asked that, and he said, well, there is this ocean, and sometimes it forms into icebergs by the cooling influence of the Bhakta's love. So those beings that love God in form, they will congeal him into a form, and he will do that for them. And then the sun of non-dual wisdom rises and melts that at the end of an age. So he's got people sitting there, some of them are attached to formlessness and some of them love form. And when he says that about congealing God into a form, all the devotees perk up and laugh. They say, we're the superior path. Then he says, the sun of non-dual wisdom rises and it melts that. Then all of them shut up, and all the lovers of formlessness go, there, see, we're the superior path. And of course, they're all missing the idea, the proper idea. And so if the Bhaktas complained to Sri Ramakrishna about that perspective, then he said, oh, well, don't worry. There are icebergs that never melt. You see, talk about spiritual genius and some great Maha diplomacy, I'd say. He would say, there are icebergs that never melt in the ocean. They become so solid that they turn into rock almost. The sun can't melt them. So then the Bhaktas are all of a sudden happy again. And it's true, those great icebergs of congealed consciousness are the Buddhas, the Krishnas, the Ramakrishnas, the Moses, the Jesuses. They'll stay in the mind of human beings for ages, for millions of lifetimes, through the ages. And some beings living in the ages will all of a sudden have this inkling to see what it feels like to immerse themselves in the ocean of consciousness and become no form again. As Vivekananda said toward the end of his life, I want to be a name without a form. Or I'm sorry, I think it was, I want to be a voice without a form. So if he could just be a voice inside of us, like he's the voice that's speaking right now through myself, and he's the voice that's in your mind, speaking to you about how important it is to keep following the path and stay on it, and to exert yourself towards enlightenment, to increase your bhakti for God with form, as well as bring about the opportunity for and the possibility of finding the ocean of Brahman and taking at least a little dip in it to see what formlessness is like. That's called samadhi. Then that's what he would want. He would want to be this voice that would tell us that would urge us on towards these goals. Two great goals really there. And so I'm saying that here at the apex of the path, because once the great soul who wants to know the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, wants to get to the peak of the mountain, is going to follow one path, basically. That's called the discrimination between the real and the unreal. That's Viveka, what Swamiji named himself after. So that Viveka was what got formed by everything that was in all these other darshanas through the ages. That's the one thing that came out that is the provision to get yourself up that red path up to the peak of the mountain. And it's not like there might not be resting places on the way up there. I think this might be like the Matterhorn or something. I forget which mountain I borrowed for this. But there are resting places that they list for mountaineers all the way up here that you can rest and get acclimatized to higher elevation. You can even sleep overnight up there if you want. There's not much room for one body even. But that could also be an analogy to be used for this path that's a razor's edge path, they call it. It's the path of discrimination. If you started up this path with a backpack full of provisions, and it probably is the case, we know it's the case with Mount Everest, there's a lot of junk at the bottom. Because people got up there and said, I'm going to dispense with this, I'm going to dispense with this. The only thing they end up keeping is this bottle with some precious water in it and a little bit of frozen food or concentrated nuts and things. That's all they ended up with their path. So this is another idea of how a lot of what you divest yourself of, if you are able to transcend the three gunas, if you are able to renounce the 24 tattvas, if you are able to climb to the 8th limb of yoga, if you are able to attain the 9 great accomplishments or the 8 great accomplishments and divest yourself of the 9 complacencies, all of these things that you learned along the way were the qualifying things that brought you to this path with just a few provisions to finally assail the gates, the top of the mountain. That's beyond heaven. Heaven was back here. Hell was in here. But you're talking about something that transcends worlds of name and form, time and space. Birth and death were back here at this point. Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep were back here at this point. And you had qualified yourself here at the base of the path for I love God with all my heart, all my soul, all my mind. And I love God and God alone. And with that provision, you were able to start your trip up the Advaitika route. That's what I was trying to get to today, and I hope I achieved it. Remember that we looked at then this fourth hand, as it were, of the mother, that is the foundation for these three great darshanas that we looked at, and which we will then turn to look at these other 3 or 4 in the next 3 weeks of time. And that probably allows us to end here with some devotional hymn ourselves, our devotional hymn to the non-dual reality. Jananim Sharadam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Pado Padme Toye Shritva Pranamami Mahor Mahor Pranamami Mahor Narendra Shashave, Narendra Yovane, Narendra Kridane, Narendra Shikshane, Narendra Palane, Narendra Shakshane, Vivekananda Te Prabhate Pranjali Spulingan Spotayan Subtiragni Yatan Tataiva Twamyate Vikiryam Manushim Parigyana Prabham Acharir Bharate Vivekanandate Prabhate Pranjali Narendra Shashave Narendra Yovane Narendra Kridane Narendra Shikshane Narendra Palane Narendra Hyarpane Vivekanandate Prabhate Pranjali Narendra Narendra Yovane Narendra Yovane Narendra Kridane Narendra Shikshane Narendra Palane Narendra Hyarpane Vivekanandate Prabhate Pranjali Vivekanandate Prabhate Pranjali Vivekanandate Prabhate Pranjali. The eternal verities contained within the Vedic religion were revealed and explained lucidly by you. This humbled the pride of those who erroneously proclaimed that their own creed was the only superior one to all others. By silencing these assumptions, you have opened all minds to truth and drawn attention to a truly universal faith. In this auspicious dawn of enlightenment, O Vivekananda, we offer you our humble salutations. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om peace, peace, peace. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat Om.